Welcome to All Things Financial with Jack Driscoll.
Welcome back again, everyone, to another edition of All Things Financial. As you know, I do this show every week as a series on TV and radio to try to bring to you different areas that business owners and individuals alike have regarding financial planning and many areas in dealing with your finances. So today, we're fortunate to have a guest with us over the next couple shows doing a series. And Dan Zugell, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Dan actually is Senior Vice President of Business Transition Advisors. And Dan, I'll let you explain a little bit about what that is and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Jack. Business Transition Advisors is what the name says. We assist business owners with their business transition objectives, try to find suitable ways for a business owner to transfer the business to the next generation or to key management.
Do you find that many times business owners never give this a thought until either it's too late or never think about it at all until it happens to them?
Unfortunately, that's true, and that does happen a lot. A lot of folks like to die with their boots on and do not consider the effects of what happens when you exit your business that way, unfortunately. With proper planning, a much smoother transition can be had and more beneficial for all involved, Jack.
Can you explain maybe just a little bit about when a business owner gets to a point where they say, I need to start thinking about this, just generally what different areas they start thinking about?
Sure, Jack. Many business owners, when they start thinking about it, which is the first step, quite frankly, start thinking about what's going to happen to this business at some point in the future. And there's four main ways of transferring a business. One, of course, is an outright sale, maybe to a strategic buyer, maybe to private equity. There is the management buyout. And one little known way being an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan. Well, it's not so little known, but it's often left off the list. And it's a government-sanctioned plan that allows some significant tax advantages, Jack, to business owners when they're considering their exit strategy.
Okay, let me ask you then, let's talk a little bit about this ESOP, because as you say, most people in business aren't even aware that strategy exists, right?
That's exactly right, Jack. An ESOP is, well, I want to just go over some of the basic history of ESOP, what the purpose is, and then we can talk about more specifics about maybe how they work down the line.
Okay.
An ESOP is a qualified defined contribution retirement plan, very similar to 401k, pension plans, profit-sharing plans. In fact, it's found in the same code sections as those plans I just mentioned. So we have to follow a lot of the government rules and regulations with vesting, discrimination, and some of those other rules that apply to other type qualified plans. But like those other type qualified plans, if you do follow the rules and do things the right way in the right order, you can get some tremendous tax advantages to both the company and the selling shareholder, Jack.
Well, let me ask you, who should be considering an ESOP? What would a typical candidate look like?
Well, that's a great question as well. I often, when I speak in front of groups, I talk about the typical business owner. I often say Joe and Mary's cement company. Typical scenario, especially around our area here. You have a business that might have been in business 30, 40 years, has a couple kids grown up, sent a few kids to college, has a nice business. And Joe's Cement Company, in my scenario, Jack, started this cement business with a wheelbarrow and a bag of Quikrete. Quickly bought more wheelbarrows, bought trucks, bought competitors, and grew this business over the years to a $10, $15, $20 million business. And now Joe and Mary are thinking, well, I'm thinking about retiring. How do I transfer this business? Because I have children in the business. I might have key managers in the business. They can't afford to buy me, because the saying is, if your managers and your kids can afford to buy you, you paid them too much. So they can't afford to buy Joe and Mary. However, Joe and Mary can't afford to really give the business away because they've put all their hard work and sweat equity and their equity into this business, and they're looking to monetize this business to retire. And that's a typical scenario. And where it starts working from a business size standpoint, generally we're looking at a business that has about $1 million of net earnings, okay, or $1 million of EBITDA for those in the financial world, about 20 or more employees, and about $1 million of payroll. Because there are costs and expenses associated with employee stock ownership plans or ESOPs, both on the front end when you install an ESOP and put it in place, as well as some ongoing expenses. So that's the typical scenario, Jack. And throughout our area and the country, quite frankly, we see a lot of folks in this position that maybe don't want to sell to an outside third party. They want to keep their culture. They want to make sure the jobs stay in this town. They want to make sure that the people that's trusted on them all these years and the clubs they support, the library, the Boy Scouts, they want to make sure these things are still intact to protect both their family and community legacy. And that's where an ESOP really does come into play. And to that end, the federal government and the state government to some extent has built into ESOPs some tremendous tax advantages to incentivize businesses and business owners to consider installing an ESOP. There are 4 major tax advantages, if I may. The first major tax advantage, it's called an Internal Revenue Code 1042. It's very similar to a real estate exchange that many of your audience, Jack, probably has heard of. You have an old piece of real estate and you sell it and you buy a new piece of real estate. You don't have to necessarily recognize a taxable gain on the growth of the value of that piece of property. And likewise, in an ESOP plan, if a business owner sells their business, and back to Joe started this business, remember in my scenario with a wheelbarrow and a bag of Quikrete, has grown this business substantially over the years, there's a large gain, taxable gain, of the value of that business that's going to be taxed at a federal rate of either 20% or with Obamacare, 23.8%, plus the state of Pennsylvania at over 3%. The federal legislation says if a business owner chooses to sell their business to an ESOP, the seller can indefinitely defer and potentially eliminate all the capital gains taxes that are normally due on the sale of a business.
Wow.
That's quite a tremendous tax advantage and incentive. And this incentive has been around since 1974 when the government first put this into the ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act in 1974, and it's been around ever since. So that's the oldest and one of the strongest tax benefits of an ESOP. The second major tax advantage of an ESOP is for every dollar the selling shareholder sells to the ESOP, the corporation, the company, gets a dollar for dollar income tax deduction. It reduces the corporation's taxable profits dollar for every dollar's worth the seller sells to the ESOP. For example, the seller sells $10 million worth of stock to its ESOP, and the ESOP is a purchaser of stock. It's a new owner of the stock. The company will get a $10 million income tax deduction. So that reduces the taxable income of the company and approximately save $3.5 to $4 million in income taxes just from that deduction alone. The third major tax advantage, and Jack, sometimes people think this is unbelievable. And it's quite
that's
dramatic.
What I'm thinking. This is fantastic.
It really is. It's remarkable. And this third advantage, and before I'm going to caveat it even before I say it. People say, Dan, these advantages are very great. When are they going to close these loopholes in the federal and state government? But the answer is the federal government really likes ESOPs. They like the concept because ultimately, as we're going to talk about later and in further shows, employees are getting shares of the company in which they work, creating independent wealth for the American businesses. And so, in theory, those are less folks that are going to be reliant upon the government safety nets in the future. So therefore, employees getting independent wealth is a good thing. So if you look at our political spectrum, without getting political, some parties like the idea of spreading the wealth, individuals having independent wealth from the company in which they built. The other side of the house, or the other side of the political spectrum, says, well, great, we don't mind that at all. That helps America. But to that end, to encourage that, we're going to offer some significant tax breaks and incentives to do so. And this next tax advantage is a result of that. To the extent a company is ESOP owned, and many companies in today's current market environment are going 100%. The seller are selling 100% of their stock to their retirement plan, being the ESOP. Once that happens, that company's profits become 100% tax exempt. The company nor the previous shareholder, nor the ESOP has to pay tax on the profits of that company ever again. We've just increased the cash flow of that company by 35 to 40%. And we use that tax savings, Jack, to potentially pay off the loans that were incurred to buy stock from the selling shareholder in the first place. And then the fourth, see, that's the thing that people say that's hard to believe. Yes. But it is absolutely true, and a major incentive for today's businesses to consider selling their shares to an ESOP. And the fourth big tax advantage, and we'll touch on this in later episodes, Jack, but there's some very significant estate planning transfer opportunities for large estates that want to transfer wealth from the current generation that might be taxable under the estate tax rules, and maybe transfer large amounts of wealth to future generations, children and grandchildren, and pass the tax liability down the road and get more family assets into future generations' hands on a very tax-advantaged way.
Those are huge advantages, Dan.
They're very large.
Yeah,
and they're very large.
They're big. I know they're unexpected by many people that are listening and watching. Dan, what are some of the non-tax advantages?
Thanks, Jack. That's a great question. I often get bogged down in the numbers because I do a lot of the numbers side of things. But the non-tax advantages are very significant as well. The first one being the ESOP is a ready and willing buyer of stock. I mean, tomorrow the ESOP is ready and willing and able to purchase the stock from the selling shareholder versus the selling shareholder finding a business broker, writing a memorandum and shopping the business on the marketplace, and maybe having some undesirable third parties looking at financials, pretending to want to buy the company. The ESOP is a ready and willing buyer. And to that end, since it's the sponsoring company's retirement plan that is buying the stock, that leaves out those uninterested third party partners, new partners that the business owner might have.
Right. Joe's
been doing what Joe does for the last 30, 40 years. Joe maybe does not want to have a new business partner, or maybe a larger owner, a larger percent owner, saying we're wearing ties on Fridays. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that the business owner can sell and still be there, retain salary, control, and we're going to talk about at great length at later episodes, but the selling shareholder, despite selling more than 51% of the company, can retain control of the company and still get those salary perks and benefits and other items that a person that is president and CEO of a company would normally enjoy. And then lastly, for the seller, the advantage, which I'm going through right now, the seller advantages, the family and community legacy. This seller is often a major part of the fabric of the community. This ensures that the seller can still contribute to the fabric of the society that they always have. Now, advantages to the company. The one I mentioned was the company is no longer paying income tax, potentially. That's a heck of an advantage to a business that's looking to grow. If they're not paying income tax, they could generally outbid any competitor they want to outbid. Their profit margins are greater. They're going to hire more people and become more profitable. And ESOPs do statistically become more profitable, and ESOP companies do become more profitable. Now, to the employees themselves, statistics are quite dramatic. For employees that happen to work at a company that installs an ESOP, their typical retirement benefit is 2.5 times the retirement benefit that a company without an ESOP would have. For a 401k loan, so 2.5 times. And ESOP employees were 4 times less likely to be laid off during that last recession we had a few years ago. So it's quite remarkable for the employee standpoint, both from their retirement benefits for themselves and their families, and for job retention. And advantages to the community. Now, I mentioned that somewhat, the advantages to the community, but keeping that business there and functioning. Keeping the jobs in that community, Jack. I've met with business owners over the last 18 years that I've been doing this, and many of them have the same concern. I want to make sure my employees are taken care of. I do not want to sell my business to an outside party that's just interested in my patents and wants to lay off my manufacturing division in the town in which I work. I want to show up at church on Sunday and see the people that I used to have employed by me still have a job and still functioning and still contributing to my community. Because if an ESOP company or a non-ESOP company gets sold to an outside buyer, there's a good chance employees will be laid off. There's a good chance that the attorneys in town, the accountants in town, and the banks in town are going to lose a client as well. And a lot of those folks at that company that have been maybe do retain their jobs might take a significant salary cut because the new owners want to be lean and mean. And so the community and family legacy, the name on the door, the bust in the entrance of the business can still remain. And Joe and Mary in my scenario can still hold their head proud and say, I did right by my employees. I did right by my community because I did an ESOP. Yes, I got some significant tax advantages myself, but I've really rewarded my employees, both rank and file and executives, and retained my business that I can be still in control of. And I know I said that a few times, but maybe I only want to be in control another 5 to 6 years. Then maybe I can turn over control to my son, my daughter, my key managers when they're ready to do so.
That's a good point, too, because we look at a lot of companies, our blood and our sweat goes into our whole career. Our whole life was absorbed by this business. Sometimes we do without hobbies and family sacrifices to build these businesses. And then sometimes our goal is to cash out, but other times our goal is to perpetuate the business and hopefully giving to the people who contributed the most and have the most incentive to try to continue the business as we invented it and perpetuated it, right?
That's exactly right, Jack. And employees embrace ESOPs, and it works for everybody's benefit. It works for the employees, the community, and we're going to talk at a later time, but even the seller has an incentive for the business to continue to do well. So down the line, they do have like I said, a financial incentive if the business does well. And to this end, Jack, to circle back to our conversation about the government and why they do like ESOPs, the fact that it is distributing wealth, and there are tax advantages in which, to do that. There was some pending legislation that died in the last Congress, but now with this new Congress, we're expecting it to be reintroduced. It was actually an Employee Ownership Expansion Act to actually increase the tax advantages that I mentioned earlier, to make them even greater, to give even more incentives for businesses to sell their business to their own ESOP, which is a retirement plan. And it would do several things, Jack. It would, like I said, increase the tax benefits specifically to S corporation ESOPs, because a lot of the companies today, as you know, are S corporations or pass-through type entities, right, which is different than C corporation ESOPs, C corporations or LLCs. So this would give additional advantages to S corporations. It would also incentivize banks to lend for ESOP purposes. It would actually give a tax break to banks, and I know what we're all thinking, that banks really need tax breaks, but they're going to give banks a tax break on the interest they earn on loans for ESOP purposes. Wow. They want to exclude some of the tax that they'd have to pay if they loan for ESOP purposes to incentivize them to do more ESOP lending. And the additional provision of that would be, currently, if a business owner sells more than 51% of their business to an ESOP, a classified minority-owned business or woman-owned business enterprise would lose their status. This bill would clean that up as well to say just because these business owners happen to enjoy the status of being minority and women-owned, they would not lose their status should they go to an ESOP, Jack.
Oh, that's big.
So that's the federal legislation that shows this isn't too good to be true. Yeah. And when is the government going to close this loophole? They're looking to actually increase it and expand it. Correct. And then locally, the ESOP community is looking to change the Pennsylvania law for our Pennsylvania friends. Exactly right. Looking to expand tax benefits in the state of Pennsylvania. Because right now, you still have to pay Pennsylvania capital gains tax, which is 3% on the sale of a business. Although federal law says, and you may remember my tax benefits, number one was the selling shareholder potentially does not have to pay federal capital gains tax on the sale of a business. In the state of Pennsylvania, unfortunately, we're one of 3 states, I believe, in which you still have to pay the 3% state capital gains tax. So we are working and shaking and moving in Harrisburg, and there is pending legislation that is being shopped for co-sponsors at the time of this taping, Jack, that will change that, and in Pennsylvania, hopefully, will reciprocate the federal law and allow Pennsylvania business owners to not pay Pennsylvania capital gains tax on the sale of a business.
That's pretty interesting. So really almost through the communities, the employees, the employers, the sellers, the banks, and the federal and state governments, everybody seems to be wanting to help business owners, from what you're saying, help perpetuate the businesses that they've created instead of allowing them to die.
That's exactly right, Jack. And that's what happens a lot of times when business owners don't plan ahead and they, quote unquote, die with their boots on.
Yeah.
Then it's a fire sale, unfortunately. The family's left trying to sell a business where the key rainmaker is no longer living and no provisions were made. And then the competitors come in like vultures and want to give pennies on the dollars to the family of the shareholder.
And I've seen, we're at the end of today's show, so we'll continue in the next segment, but I've seen situations right here in Pittsburgh. Businesses actually, after 2 or 3 years of trying to sell, could not find a buyer, a suitable buyer, closed their doors and received zero for all those years of work.
That's correct. It's
through
unfortunate.
Either lack of planning or wrong pricing or not being able to find someone. And here those employees that have been set up in advance might have been the perfect opportunity, and they just didn't think they could afford it. They didn't know how.
I totally agree, Jack.
So what we'll do, I appreciate your coming on today's show.
Thank you for having me.
We're out of time for today. We'll be back again next week with another edition of All Things Financial with our guest, Dan Zugell, and thanks again, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Dan, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the best way to get a hold of me is by phone at 724-766-3998. That's 724-766-3998. Or dzugell, DZUGELL at bta.us.com. Or visit my website at esopguy.com.
Very good. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
You've been listening to All Things Financial with your friend with the answers to all financial matters, Jack Driscoll of Driscoll Insurance and Financial Services. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Sage Point Financial Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer and registered investment advisor and member FINRA and SIPC. Driscoll Insurance and Financial Services is not affiliated with Sage Point Financial, Inc. or registered as a broker, dealer, or investment advisor. You can reach Driscoll Insurance and Financial Services Incorporated at 412-833-1500, and they are located at 2738 South Park Road, Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, 15102.